Hello, everybody, and I got it spot on. I was aiming for that. Hello, hope you're having a nice day. Welcome to tonight's Railfan TV stream. I'm JD, but I'm not the main attraction tonight. You'll all be pleased to know. I will stop wittering in a couple of minutes. I wanted to give a quick intro to tonight's stream because it's something a little bit different to what we've done in the past. So we're going to do what we're calling a creator spotlight, which is where we're going to shine the light on one of our amazing content creators who do a really brilliant job of being able to put together some really great videos and streams and other bits and pieces to kind of give you guys a bit more entertainment, a bit more knowledge, and a bit more excitement about our games. So tonight we're going to be featuring Train Simulator Driver. Now, if you don't know a lot about Train Simulator Driver, there is a lot to learn. We've put a bio, we put a link to their channel on the description of this stream, so we recommend that you check them out. There's also a bio on our website on Railfan TV schedule, which I'm just going to chuck in the chat. And I am big face today, sorry. He's Paul, and he is in the chat today. So hello, Paul. Thanks very much for joining us because I know it's 5 a.m. your time in Australia. Happy post Anzac Day. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction to what the stream is all about tonight. So this is a pre-recorded video, but yeah, Paul will be in the chat to answer any questions that you have. This video has come about after a discussion with myself, although I can't take any credit for this, and an idea that Paul had for putting together a scenario that pushes Scenario Planner in Train Sim World 2 to its absolute limits. He wanted to create a scenario which put together as much what he calls rail estate as he possibly could do to make a lively scenario that's unusual, fills a gap that can never happen commercially, and most of all, and most importantly, is fun for everybody to play. So the result is what he is calling Amtracking the Curve, and I really love the name, where he asks you to suspend common sense and believe in electromagnetic or electricery while we crew a ACS 64 hauled from Amtrak train from New York to Pittsburgh. So we're going to start in Altoona and our shift will finish in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. So Paul will then explain a little bit about how he plans the scenario for a few minutes, and then we'll get into the driving. So building the scenario and testing it took him about 20 hours. So this is a phenomenal bit of work from him. Thank you very much for putting this together. Full of fun and frustration, but mostly fun as he pushed Scenario Planner to its absolute limits. So without further ado, I'm going to get this video live. I hope you all enjoy it, and let me know what you think in the forums. Thanks very much again to Train Simulator Driver for tonight. You can check him out on the channel. If you check the link in the description, check out his channel and subscribe to him if you like what you see, because he's got loads and loads of brilliant content on his channel. Let's do this, shall we? Okay, on with the video.
G'day viewers, Train Simulator Driver here from Down Under. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a content creator and I run a small channel on YouTube, and I also have experience in real railways. Today I want to take you on a little bit of a journey of imagination on Horseshoe Curve. Rod Serling once said, "You are travelling through another dimension, a dimension not only of sight and sound but of mind, a journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of imagination." Well, that's what I'm going to ask you to do today. So I started out with this. I wanted to create a big scenario for Horseshoe Curve because it's a big route and it's got a lot of traffic with a lot of big trains. And I have to say my idea had to evolve because there were a few constraints in what I was trying to do, but I got there. And I just want you to come along on that journey now. Creating scenarios is pretty easy, right? Well, yes, no, maybe, kinda, sure, all of the above. So we've got the Horseshoe Route, and it runs from Juanita Loco Shops all the way down to Johnstown at the other end, and of course there's Winbar, where the Rosebud Mine is as well, on the South Fork branch. But there's something missing. There's a ton of freight, good variety, lots of fun, great gameplay. But there's 2 trains a day that aren't there. And they're not there for commercial reasons because it would just cost too much to produce a whole locomotive and car set just for 2 trains. But we can use our imagine and make it happen. And that's where my scenario comes in. Well, more on that in a moment. So I had a look at the map and I worked out where I could go and where I couldn't go. And then I started to work out where all the starting points were and where they can stop. And no, I don't really intend you to be able to read this. But as you can see, it started getting really complex because, of course, all of the starting points had paths or destinations, and those paths had stopping points. And it was getting a bit silly. It was getting really hard to visualize this in my head. So I needed something better. So I did this. I overlaid the map with all of the paths that I could put trains onto. And I discovered some interesting things, such as the path to Rosebud Mine from Altoona doesn't actually go to Rosebud Mine, it goes to Johnstown. Oh well. But there's a lot of other opportunities for moving traffic around this thing, and you can keep the thing quite busy. Now, there was a little bit of a downside. While this is a route created for really long trains, the stopping points that you get in Scenario Planner mostly aren't. And because of what I wanted to do, I was already going to be using two of the biggest ones to facilitate the train that I wanted to run. So what to do? I created a timetable. Now, you've probably already guessed from some of the names that you can see here that we're going to be running the Amtrak services that are missing. Now, there's two of them. There's one in the morning from Johnstown to Altoona, and there's one in the evening from Altoona to Johnstown. Now, these form part of the Pennsylvanian, and they run from New York to Pittsburgh, and vice versa. Now, I'm taking a little bit of poetic license because my morning Amtrak is actually going to run in the afternoon so that we can cross it and see it. And I've put in a bunch of other trains, and this is what's called a string diagram, where basically down the left-hand side, we've got the names of our places, and across the top, we've got the times. And this helped me visualize when I would have to start trains out from their locations and where I'd have to take them to so that they would actually cross my path so I'd be able to see them. Because after all, having trains moving is not that exciting if you can't actually see them. And I wanted quite a few. You can see it gets a little sparse towards the end because there's not so many stopping points down there, but we're still going to get a heap of traffic. And we're going to have some fun. And I thought I'd take it to another level by adding in just a little bit more. And we'll see what that is shortly. Grand. So now we've got a timetable and we've got a route, the Horseshoe Curve. And we're going to need the Scenario Planner. And I've called mine Amtrak and the Curve. So let's just have a quick look inside. Now, it's an off the rails because we need to be able to run things that don't come with the route, particularly the Amtrak stuff. But I've also taken some liberties with a bunch of other things. And I've gone for a little bit of a theme that you'll see when we go for our drive. But first up, I've got our player service. Now, I always name my player service as player, so I don't confuse it. And then I've got a bunch of other AI services, which happen to be named for all of the ones that I plotted out on my little graph. So you can see there's quite a variety in here. And they're pretty easy to manage. Now, I'm not going to go through building a scenario with you because there's some good tutorials on that. There's some on my channel. There's some on other people's channels. There's Dovetail. I've got some good ones as well. I particularly encourage you to watch the journey by Sam that ran over several weeks that built up a scenario over a long time, because it does take a long time. Now, I've spent probably 20 hours on this, I would have to say. I originally estimated 10, so I was a bit off. And most of that comes from testing, because you want your scenario to actually work before you upload it to Creators Club. It's kind of important. Make sure you test, because sometimes things don't go the way you planned. Right then, viewers, it's time to start our journey of imagination. We're going to be Amtraking the curve. So let's get this beast set up. We want to get our reverser into forward. We want to put our brakes into passenger. Turn on some lights, turn on some ditch lights. And one of the really cool things that I discovered is that Access and ATC work on this route, which is brilliant. So we just get our rail driver set to be more or less the same as what the game's doing. Probably should have reset that at the start. So, welcome aboard the Pennsylvanian here in Altoona, our twice daily service through the Allegheny Mountains. Remember to find your right seat and keep your arms and legs inside the ride at all times. Today we're hauled by an ACS-64 operating electromagically, or perhaps on electrickery. because we don't really have the overhead wires, and this is kind of an electric locomotive. So here's that journey of imagination I was talking about. Now, off to our left here, we have a pair of ES44 ACs in Norfolk Southern livery who are returning from helper service on the grade. Let's just trundle over to the museum for a moment. So this is the Railroaders Memorial Museum. It's run by a museum club, and it's in competition with the State Railroad Museum. Now, this one opened in 1980 and has a selection of PRR and Norfolk Southern and some other rolling stock. Cool. Let's jump back in our train. We're just about ready to go. Almost loaded our passengers up now. I'm just watching the little circle up in the top left there. And I'll start the doors closing. So, looks like we're ready to go. So we're currently leaving Altoona Station, and we'll be heading towards Johnstown today. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now departing on our 1.85% gradient climb up through the Allegheny Mountains. We'll be heading up towards the summit at Glitzen, followed by a descent to Johnstown of around about 1%. Speeds vary a lot on the curves and the hills, so expect about an hour to Johnstown this evening. Weather is currently clear and fine, and we're expecting nice weather when we arrive as well. You're in luck this evening, because as a special treat, the Railroad Museum has organised some unusual traffic spread throughout the normal traffic on the curve, so keep an eye out for some interesting things. Slowing down a little bit too much. I really quite like this route, and I enjoy all of the variety in the services and gameplay that you get. And it's even more fun that you can make your own scenarios like we have here. I've got to be a little bit careful staying out of the cab because I am running safety systems, and they will yell at me and stop the train if I get it wrong. So we're hauled today by ACS 64, number 604. How did we end up in a rock? Let's try that again. We ended up in a rock! Alright, I'll wait till we're not in rocks. Alright, let's try it again. There we go. It's always vaguely funny when you end up in a rock, isn't it? Sure, we've all been there. I'm using a combination of my rail driver and keyboard to control today because the rail driver is not particularly fine in the adjustments of the throttle. Looks like we're passing a nice little shipping warehouse on our left there. I ran through the route using imagery that I could find on various mapping products. And things like social media. And yes, that crossing didn't work, but that's okay. And I found that the actual route itself is quite faithful to the real location, so it's really good. I mean, there's a little bit of license taken because you need to, because you're building a game, but yeah, for the most part, it's quite reflective of what's really there. Certainly got into the steep climb early. The main trick to driving on a route like this is just to little adjustments. Make your little adjustments, wait and see what they do, and try and make sure you stay under the limit. Now, I'll be driving to ATC today, but I have got the signalling and distance and speed limits up there in the top right-hand corner for you to follow along with. Coming along on our left here is another pair of ES44s. These are helper units coming back down from the grade, having just pushed another train up. And they're operating in a style that's called elephant, where they are coupled long hood to long hood. There's our alerter, just making sure I'm awake. Hang on. Yeah, I think I'm awake. Good-o. And the idea of running in elephant... Uh-oh, going too fast. And I'm getting a penalty. It's okay, we should be able to reset our way out of that. It's a problem with trying to talk and drive at the same time. But anyway, all good. So the reason that they run elephant, where they're long hood to long hood, is so that they can run in either direction easily and the crew has good visibility without actually having to turn the locomotives. So there are plenty of places that you can turn them on this route, but that of course takes time. Getting a locomotive through a Y takes a good 15 or 20 minutes, whereas just changing ends takes about 3 minutes. So you know what the beam counters are going to prefer, don't you? I'm sure the people in the cab probably want to go around the Y because, you know, they've got their esky or cooler full of stuff, and they've got their food, and they've made their chair comfortable, and then they have to change ends. Oh well. Now, our speed's holding pretty steady, but I need to drop to 35 mile an hour fairly soon. And ATC is going to yell at me for that pretty soon as well, so I'll just start that process now. I'll just use a little bit of the train brake to bring it down, even though we're powering. And then reset the throttle and go back to where we were, because that'll hold us just below the limit. Here's our signs here. Acknowledging the ATC change. Now, coming up soon is the famous Horseshoe Curve. We're not too far away from it now. So the curve was completed by the Pennsylvania Railroad in 1854. And it's 2,375 feet long. And it's about 1,300 feet in diameter. And what that means is that the crews on longer trains, like the big double stacks that you see on this route quite a bit, can actually wave to their rear helpers as they go through the horseshoe. And just as an interesting thing, they happen to be travelling in opposite directions when they're doing that. can speed up again a little here, but we're going to have to slow down to 35 again for another corner very, very soon. Now I find this route's actually quite interesting to drive because you have to keep speeding up and slowing down. Using gravity to do it this time. And I've come down just a little bit early, but that's fine. It's better to be under than over. You can see off to our left over there, you can see the track. So we're coming into the curve. You can see the visitor centre at the bottom down there and the dam. Alright passengers, as we come into the curve, make sure you wave to the rail fans in the park. I'll just let them know we're coming. Because they're sure to be snapping your picture as we pass through. The visitor centre here is maintained by the Altoona Railroaders Memorial Museum, the same one we had down in Altoona. And the locomotive that you saw in the park is a Pennsylvania Railroad Gp9 made by General Motors Electromotive Division. It's number 7048 and it was built in 1955. It was operated on this road by various operators until it was restored to its PRR paint scheme and placed here in 1985. There is a two-car funicular railroad bringing visitors up and down the steep hill from the visitors centre to the park. My research on the curve suggests that at one point there was a steam engine up there. And it got modernised. So we're climbing away from Horseshoe Curve, or HSC as it's referred to on the charts, and we're heading towards MG, otherwise known as mid-grade. You can just start to see coming up on our right-hand side, there will be the MG Interlocking Tower. MG represents the middle of the grade or the midpoint on our climb today towards the summit. MG Tower has no use today and is slated for demolition by Norfolk Southern. The place is still used by dispatchers and crews to manage trains and report their progress along the grade. Letting our track workers know that we're here. So this is MG Tower here. It's sad that NS want to kill it, but I dare say they don't want to maintain it, and sooner or later it'll probably fall on a train, which would be a little bit unattractive. Here's one of our special trains. You can see two Canadian National GP38s hauling a set of tank cars. It's an unusual sight to see some foreign power on the route, particularly something as old as the GP38. That train is progressing towards Rose Yard in Altoona, and it's come from Cresson today. Train looks nice and shiny, glistening in the sun. That's a seriously steep road over there. Be a cool place to ride a motorbike, I'm tipping. That was our alerter yelling at me to make sure I'm awake still. I think I am. I kind of love the way the flowers grow in TSW2 as you approach them. I know it's probably a bug, but, you know, it's just fun. Quickly take this opportunity to thank Nat and JD, who brought me into the Ambassadors program for Dovetail Games. Here we've got a pair of GP9s. So they're just like the one that's up on the plinth back there. And they're hauling a train of covered hoppers. And they're travelling today from Portage to Altoona. It's a proper museum piece, that one. Quite like the distant scenery in this route. It looks nice. And I think they manage pop-in artifacts quite well. You still see a bit of it happening, but it's pretty cool for the most part. You don't see much of it at all when you're inside the cab. It's a bit quiet in here, isn't it? Ah, it's better. Wouldn't want to be able to hear ourselves think or anything. You may have noticed I don't use the rail driver for the alerter and for opening and closing doors and things like that. I use something more fun. I use Box. Box is a little gaming keyboard that I built with some arcade buttons and an arcade control board that I've set up to mimic the keys that TSW2 needs. Comes in really handy. One item of feedback I've given on the Rail Driver is I would love some consistency in the buttons from loco to loco. At least have a consistent set for each country. That would be highly appreciated. This little box up here tells me we're coming up to one of my favourite railfan sites, so let's get up there. Hopefully the alerter won't go off while I'm in here. It's just a cool place for shots. Now coming into Glitzen Tunnel, which means we're very close to the summit of the grade. There's actually 3 tunnels here at Glitzen, and you can see our gradient starting to slacken off, but I've increased power just a little bit. The 3 tunnels were opened up starting in 1854 through to 1904. They are named Glitzen, Allegheny and New Portage tunnels. 2 of them are double track and 1 of them is single track. These were built and this line was put in because it was a much easier gradient than what was there before at the Allegheny Portage Railroad. The tunnels were enlarged in the Conrail era to handle the double stack container traffic that you often see on this line. And the hill that these tunnels pass through is quite appropriately named Tunnel Hill. There's a lot of imagination going on there. As we pop out of the tunnels, we come into the Township of Glitzen, which is where we reach the summit of the line, and we'll shortly start to descend towards Johnstown. Now, Glitzen is sitting on the summit of what is the eastern continental divide of the United States. And it's one of only 5 gaps in the Appalachian Mountains to allow reasonably easy grades for rail traffic, permitting east and west transfers. And you'll notice that we have flattened out here. And we've just started our descent, so I'm just coming into the braking range now. Got some more track workers here. And a road crossing. And now we're coming down on the 1%. So Glitzen's home to only around 1,500 people, and the town's at an elevation of 1,668 feet. The town originally grew thanks to iron and coke production, and of course the railroad. Today there's still a small yard and a Y for turning helper locomotives prior to their trip back down the grade. I'm just bringing our speed up to 40. I'm not going to bother going over that at this point because we're going to get restricted to that very shortly. Now, ATCS should leave me alone doing 41. Shouldn't have to do anything. And we'll be allowed back up to 60 very shortly. We're now coming into the town of Cresson. Once the rear of our train passes that sign, we'll be allowed to speed up. There we go. I could let gravity do this, but I've got a schedule to keep. So Crescent was originally established by the PRR as a tourist destination with a place called Mountain House. And it was targeted at the people who wanted to get away from hectic city life. Today we'd probably call that a wellness experience or some other modern interesting term. Coming up on our left is another railroad park, and it's got a PRR caboose in it, which is number 477869, which had a very long history on the railroad and is kind of appropriate that it was preserved. On our right, there's a small classification yard and some minor locomotive servicing facilities for the helpers. Helpers aren't actually supported in TSW2, but most of them operate out of Crescent, either helping trains up or down the grade as needed. It's good to get a bit of speed up. We'll have to slow down again shortly. Coming up on our left is our sister train, also hauled by an ACS 64. And I've got ATC slowing me down to 60. And I've braked to get my suppression light on. We've achieved that, so we're all good now. Actually, it kind of looks like it gave me a penalty. See what happens when you go outside the train when you've got safety systems on. So we'll just accelerate back up to 60. All good. Right about now, we're passing through the tiny township of Lily. I couldn't find much information on Lily. Except some real estate brochures that describe it as the most tranquil place. Probably not very tranquil with some big ES44s thundering through dragging trains, but each to their own, I guess. All depends on what we call tranquil, doesn't it? Welcome to Lily, folks. Now at the moment we're allowed up to 79, but as you can see we're coming up to a 70 curve, so we'll just accelerate up to 70. There's being nice to our passengers, going a bit gentle. I spy a collectible coming up on my right here. You know what? You shouldn't press the door unlock and lock buttons when you're trying to press acknowledge. It's my own fault for moving box. These wire things here are quite cool to save us from falling rocks. Nice touch. Let's take us up to the full 79 now. Right now we're starting to roll through a town called Cassandra, which you can't see a lot of it from the railway. Looks like this double stack hauled by some ES44s got stopped to allow our sister train through. It's nice to give the passengers on Amtrak a little bit of priority. Quite often the front railways don't do that. So the Township of Cassandra's main claim to fame is that it's known to be one of the least diverse places in America, scoring only 4 out of 100 for ethnic diversity. You have to slow down to 60 now, so I'm braking to get suppression. There we go. You've got a few seconds to get the suppression light to come on so that you don't get penalised. And then we can release the brakes. This locomotive is pretty clever. It uses a combination of air brakes and its electric braking, or resistive braking, or dynamic braking, whatever you like to call it from where you come from. We're now coming into Portage. And you can see here, stopped at a signal waiting for the other one, is an ES44 hauling some of the elusive gondolas. You don't see these gondolas in service mode, they're only available in Scenario Planner. That might have been a GP38, actually, thinking about it. I don't think that was an ES44. I think it was a GP38. It's black and white. Big. There you go. It's a train. All good. Portage is the place where the mastery tile is for this route. Not showing that today. I shall leave that for your own imaginations to chase down. Or if you desperately want to know, there happens to be a video on my channel that takes you through it, shows you the whole thing. Gradients easing off a little. And now flat. And we are allowed back to 79. Yay! It's interesting that they use the speed of 79 for the passenger trains because there's PTC and Access. You probably could go faster. But that's what Norfolk Southern set, I guess. So we've got another train coming up on our left here. This time it's definitely ES44s, and they are pulling a very heavy trainload of coal. We're just past the halfway point. Oh, look at this sneaky little GP9 pulling some tank cars following the other train. I hope the dispatcher knows they're doing that. So Portage was the place where the original Allegheny Portage Railroad came through the mountain gradients, and the APR was abandoned in favour of the Pennsylvania Railroad when it was constructed due to its more favourable grades. In the former PRR station in Portage, there's a museum to local railroad and mining history, and it also commemorates the disaster that took the lives of 63 people from the town. The town is pretty well known for its festival called Summerfest. And you can't see it from the railway, but we're also rolling through the tiny town of Wilmore. Actually, maybe you can just see its roofs and things here, up to our left. And we're coming off the plateau and we're starting down gradient again. If we were a submarine, you'd probably call that down bubble, or something silly like that. I'll do some heavy braking now, down to 45 mile an hour. We are fast approaching South Fork. Now we're not so fast approaching South Fork. So this is an axis speed restriction for the curve. When you're out of the cab, you can see lots of industries and the like modelled here and there around the place. And this one has a large water treatment facility alongside it. Train glistening in the afternoon sun. Slightly foggy, so we're seeing some haze. Now, South Fork is where the mine branch that goes to the Rosebud mine comes off the main line. It's just up here where that big radio tower is on the left. And there's a Y here, which both allows for turning helper locomotives, and it also allows the traffic coming off the mine branch to go in either direction, towards New York or towards Pittsburgh. There's some small rail facilities with a holding yard here. Oh, I can never resist... Oops. Never resist a bit of a bridge shot, even though I went the wrong way first there. Oh well, all good. Coming up on our left here is the Portage Tipple, used for loading and unloading coal. We're approaching the end of our run today, folks. I'm just going to come down to 40. 6 and a bit miles to go. Now we're starting to roll alongside the Little Conemaugh River. Conemaugh? Something like that. Someone will correct me and put it in the comments and laugh at me. Feel free. It's the river over there I'm talking about. Quickly jump back into the cab because we have been commanded to come down to 35 mile an hour. It's always the fun bit of rail journeys. Often you hear politicians talking about, hey, we need high-speed trains. Well, yes, high-speed trains are good. But the main thing you need is to get rid of the big speed slowdowns that you get on the ends of a rail journey. It's not that uncommon to spend as much time at either end of a rail journey as you spend in the rail journey. It's kind of crazy. I know I often say things like, that's okay, but it's not really. Because it means the high-speed rail thing that we often hear politicians talk about is just that. Bring on some real high-speed rail. That's what we need. Because if you want people to ride the trains, they need to be able to get from point A to point B quickly, safely, and in a reasonable amount of comfort for a reasonable cost. And the more we can do that, the more cars will get off the road, the better. But, you know, you're a lot of rail fans, or you wouldn't be watching this, so I guess I'm preaching to the converted, aren't I? Ah, yes. Johnstown Meadows. I'll actually be sad when they fix this. I kind of like the grassy track. It's kind of cool. It probably infuriates some people, but that's okay. And now approaching Conemaugh. Conemaugh is an interesting town. The history I found is that it split away from Johnstown, and it was settled by Mr. Smith, who perhaps even at that time was trying to find Mr. Anderson, I presume. And the extensive yards around Johnstown actually start in Conemaugh. This would be a nice way to earn your living, I think. Just cruising down through the hills. Just coming into a 35 zone, but already prepared for it. Hey passengers, here's a bit of a treat. A couple of Clinchfield Heritage livery SD40s and some Clinchfield rolling stock. And what's this? Oh, that's cool. Something that came out of Creators Club. It's one of the interesting things about downloading things from Creators Club. Every now and again you just see these things that you go, well, what was that? View in from the rear of our locomotive. On our left is the Little Conemaugh River. Got a yellow signal coming up. We're being forced down to 30 mile an hour by ATC, which would suggest there's something in front of us. And we have a cab signal aspect of approach. I'll probably stay in the cab for the rest of the trip because there's a bit to do here. There are 3 miles to go. So as we come into Johnstown, it's also known as Flood City due to the almost annual flooding events that happened early in its history. And they were eventually controlled in the 1930s, or so they thought, and controlled again in the 1950s, or so they thought, and again in the 1970s, or so they thought. I guess it's a little lesson that when man takes on nature, nature usually finds a way. We'll soon be coming up on Conemaugh Yard. ATC still holding us at 30. As we start coming into the city of Johnstown, so Johnstown has got about 60,000 people living here. And it was one of the leading steel suppliers in the USA, originally with Cambria Works and later Bethlehem Steel. Some of the steel from the most famous structures in America came from this town, along with a seemingly endless supply of barbed wire to support the farming and rural communities. Looks like we've got a pair of ES44s on the back of a container train here. That's a double stack, and it's slowly creeping its way into the yard for an inspection and a crew change. We've got a track change coming up here, so we have to slow down a little more. Just keep the speed down a bit for passenger comfort as we change tracks. How good did that flange squeal sound? Just up here where the double stacks disappear off under a bridge is where the Little Conemaugh meets the Conemaugh River and forms a much larger water body. The big bridge facilitates road traffic over the river and over the yards. And there's a little bridge for facilitating rail traffic into the other part of the yard that's on the other side of the river. Passengers, we are now approaching Johnstown. We'll be stopping at Johnstown Amtrak station briefly before proceeding on to Pittsburgh. If you are leaving us here today, please gather your belongings and your children and take them with you. Any left behind will be sold. I hope you've enjoyed riding Amtrak today on our picturesque journey down through the Allegheny Mountains. Johnstown today is one of those success stories of a town that's lost a major industry that was the biggest employer, which is essentially steel, because most of the steel businesses are gone now, and most of the buildings you see in Johnstown were involved in the steel industry. It was a 12-mile long stretch of buildings along the river. There's some still here. There is still some minor steel production in town. And there's steel fabrication businesses around still as well. Most of the business now comes from tech and bio companies that have left the expensive real estate of California and New York and come here. A place where they're well serviced by universities for research programs and that has a strong student population. A number of defence industries have moved into Johnstown as well, creating additional employment. And there is a heap of sporting teams. So if you cruise around out of your train, you'll see lots and lots of sporting fields. And it's well worth having a look at Johnstown, because I have to say the Skyhook team spent a lot of effort here. And you can't even see most of it from the train, so please go out and have a look. It's really cool. I'll just shoot up into the air today so you can get a bit of an idea of what I'm talking about. There's just so much stuff. So all of those buildings are all the big steel factories and the like. And the river here is in its concrete channel to provide flood mitigation. Some quite big commercial buildings in the background. And if you follow the line along, you will find a whole lot of sporting fields and things. So as we're nearing the journey of our imagination today, I hope you enjoyed watching this, and I hope it inspires you to take on the challenge of making a technically complex scenario. I realise it's not for everyone, but please give it a go, because it's not that hard. The key points are to figure out your starting locations that you're allowed to use, and you do that with Scenario Planner. Each of those starting locations will either have a destination or they will have a path and the path itself will have several destinations. So you can use those along with the maximum lengths that you get told about to work out what trains you can run. You might like to run trains from that route. You might like to run trains from a different one, as I've done here. I'm just going to fly down to the station. And while it does certainly take a bit of effort to do it, particularly if you do a complex one like this one that takes on the entire route, and it is just a little bit challenging, the sense of achievement when you've got it done is awesome. And you can pop the thing up onto Creators Club for other people to enjoy, and it gives them a new dimension to the gameplay. And a message I'd love to pass to the route builders is please give us lots of starting and stopping points for scenarios. Particularly give us lots of long ones that suit the trains on the route. And it's important to give us a good variety of paths when you can too here. This one's actually quite good on the paths. They probably could give more because a lot of the time there's 4 tracks. And I would love to be able to use every single siding in the game. Better go and open up all the passenger steps, or they won't be able to get out. That's one of the challenges of off-the-rails mode, is some of the features are designed into the platforms. Oops, bumped up on the building there. Not that you see a lot of passengers, because it's not a passenger route, so you don't really see any. Just one of the things that we could have in the future is passengers popping up on non-passenger routes. Would be really, really, really cool. Well, that brings us to the end of our journey of imagination using electromagic and electrickery and the really cool ACS 64. So if you've enjoyed this, I'd love to see you over on my channel, TrainSimulatorDriver. I do have to pop in that I did get this DLC for free. And one of the reasons it encourages me to do things like this for you guys. So thanks very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it, and see you later. I've been TrainSimulatorDriver. Thanks for watching, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. I always like to get your feedback in the form of likes and comments because they help me understand what you want. Give the channel a subscribe and click on the tinkly things so you don't miss out on any new stuff. And thanks for your ongoing support. And please, be safe out there.